What I thought I'd do was start with a brief introduction to the company. I work for a company called Ripple, which is probably one of the pioneers in the space of distributed ledger technology. We have close to 300 employees now based in San Francisco and around the world. And we are following our customers into new markets. And I'm pleased to say that we'll be setting up an office here in Dubai before the end of the year. The focus for Ripple is to create what we call the Internet of Value, which is how do we make it as easy, as fast, as cheap to move value around the world as we can move information today. When I send you an email, I don't ask you whether your ISP speaks to my ISP. But if I am on PayPal and you are on Alipay or with a bank, I cannot do the same thing. So our focus initially is on cross-border payments, because we think that's where there is the most friction. And in this part of the world, as in ASEAN, as in Latin America, there is a huge requirement for cross-border transactions that will support the economy, both within the region, but also in terms of business that you conduct with the rest of the world. We have, to date, signed up close to 200 institutions around the world, many of them from this part of the world. So for the last three and a half years, I ran the APAC MENA business for Ripple until the end of last year. And we now have 3 banks in Saudi Arabia, 2 in Kuwait, 1 in Bahrain, 1 in Oman, a couple in the UAE here. And it really is our fastest growing marketplace. This includes Al Rajhi Bank, which is the largest Islamic bank in Saudi Arabia. And I think the chairman of the Kuwait Finance House mentioned today that they're also a client of Ripple. If you wanted to send today money out of UAE, it can be, depending on where you're sending it to, a costly and slow exercise. In some parts of the world, in South Asia, for example, banks have given up on using SWIFT and have built their own proprietary technologies to interface into these corridors so they can move money quickly and cheaply to meet the needs of the customers in these high-volume corridors. But if you want to send this money, typically you're not clear about what the fees are going to be that the bank is going to charge at the other end, and therefore what you receive might be substantially less than what you sent out. And if you're sending money for blue-collar workers, this often can be a small amount of money, $200, and the fees for these kinds of small payments can be as high as 5 to 10%. So this is actually hurting the people who can afford it the least. So we think that solving for this problem generically allows us to then say, how do we move even smaller amounts of money? And that can start to build the basis for a digital economy. Because if you now think about machines talking to each other, doing maybe 50 billion transactions every year, we are now talking about micropayments, 1/10 of a cent. And really the existing infrastructure is unable to cope with these very low value, high volume of transactions. So we think there is a requirement to build a new set of infrastructure to be able to support this kind of a digital economy. Blockchain or distributed ledgers came up a few years ago and were touted as the solution to all of our problems. Now, the innovation here, as my colleague has already mentioned to you, is about a source of truth which does not have a central authority. This is a new concept, but it uses technologies that have already been in place for a long time. The question is, how do we use this to solve real-world problems? So Ripple has been working with banks rather than against them for the last 5 years to develop a solution that will be acceptable to them, meet the compliance requirements of regulators around the world, to then deliver a high-speed, real-time, cross-border payment platform. If you look at the way networks work today, the friction is between networks. And blockchain is simply one more network. So saying one blockchain will cover the whole world is like saying we should all be with AOL or Yahoo for the internet, and that would have solved all our problems. As we know that the internet has not grown up that way. So having multiple blockchains for different use cases is good, but you can't really talk across them. So interoperability is kind of a key problem that Ripple has sought to solve. We think that by connecting networks, you will get the greatest benefit in terms of removing friction in the movement of value around the world. We do this through something called the Interledger Protocol. This is an open protocol invented by Ripple, but now being run as an open standard by more than 300 organizations that participate in the W3C committee for it. So the idea here is that a bunch of people who have an interest in making the movement of value frictionless will collaborate to build a new protocol to enable ledgers to connect with each other. Now, we are taking all of the parallels for the development of this protocol from the internet itself. And if you look at the way email works, it's because of a standard protocol, TCP/IP, that enables information to be moved in packets around the world without your necessarily having to build bespoke integrations with people from other parts of the world. So using the same model, we have developed the Interledger Protocol, which will ultimately allow a ledger in country A to talk to a ledger in country B without having to be on the same platform. This, we think, is going to solve for the Internet of Value. We are also building a basis for smart contracts, which can be built to support applications. And the XRP ledger, which is the public ledger, uses a token or a crypto asset called XRP, which is currently the fastest on the planet, about 1,500 transactions a second, and can be utilized wherever public ledgers are fit for purpose. A lot of our product does not use a public ledger because banks want secrecy and privacy in their transactions, but they will have the opportunity to use a crypto asset if and when they are ready to use it to solve for liquidity. So while technology can give you interoperability through connections, XRP as a digital token can solve for the lack of liquidity in many corridors as a bridging asset to convert from one to the other. So there is a use case for specific digital assets. There is a use case for specific kinds of distributed ledgers, and if you use them well, you can then solve for real-world problems. For example, one of the spin-offs from Ripple has been a company called Coil, which now allows you to stream very, very minute quantities of value to a website that you're visiting. So rather than sign up subscribers to a paid subscription that gives them full access or limited access through a free subscription, you can let them pay for what they see. So while they're watching the video, they stream you very small amounts of XRP. So this can start to change the way you monetize content, whether it's a newspaper or it's video or any other kind of content on the web. We think that a lot of this technology aligns very well with Sharia principles. Being able to know what are the underlying assets to a transaction, being able to identify the participants to a transaction, being able to be clear about what are the contractual roles and responsibilities, and being able to reduce risks are all aligned with Sharia principles and the opportunity to innovate to solve new problems, especially for the unbanked. If you look at tokenization as something that comes out of this technology, if you can, with integrity, tokenize an asset worth $1 million, you can now have 1 million people share in that asset rather than necessarily 1 millionaire. So it starts to solve for reach into the unbanked, and we think, therefore, aligns well with all of the Islamic finance principles that this audience is more familiar with. In terms of fintechs, and there's been questions about how to encourage fintechs. I myself had a startup 18 years ago, and I can tell you that one thing that brings fintechs to you is a marketplace. I think the UAE government saying that 50% of all government transactions will be on distributed ledgers technology by 2020 is a fantastic way to encourage innovation, to encourage take-up, to bring fintechs to your market, and then to build the capability locally to iterate on those solutions that the fintechs bring to you. So really, my message to you is that we can build the Internet of Value. There's an opportunity for Islamic finance to actually take the lead, because at this stage, nobody has cornered the marketplace for this technology in terms of how it is utilized and how it is leveraged for innovation. So in this part of the world, where we've had the greatest take-up, certainly of our products, we think there is an opportunity for you to build on this emerging technology to align with the principles of Islamic finance and create the innovation that will solve for the Islamic economy here and around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Come, take a seat. We've got about 10 minutes, so I want to invite everyone, the other two speakers, back up very quickly. We've had some of your questions through as well. I'll pose those as well. So take a seat here, and then Dilip, and then Anthony. Thank you very much indeed. To all of you, got to keep this quick before lunch, but let me just ask you this. I mean, we hear from several of you that this is the fastest growing region for you. You know, at the risk of sounding a little bit skeptical, is it because the region is playing catch up in all these spaces, or do you think there is a real potential for this region to leapfrog other regions in the technology space? Let's have a very, very quick answer from each of you.
I think generally innovation is held back by your legacy systems, and I think sometimes if your legacy system is so old that you want to throw it in the dump, then you don't have to worry so much about what you've got. You just say, I'm going to dump this and I'm going to go to the new shiny thing. Where a lot of the Europeans and the Americans, I think, are still loving and tending to their legacy systems, so they don't want to let go. Whereas I think in the Middle East, there is this aspiration to say, we need to do much, much better. So I think people who are aspirational then say, we'll leapfrog. And I think that's the opportunity that we are seeing, certainly, in the take of our technology.
And how hopeful are you that these could be the institutions here in this region that are playing that leapfrog and actually leading 5 years from now?
Just referring back to the question, I also add something. In US, still, I mean, people use like, those like coupons. Now we talk about like the digital coupons, digital applications, the shopping companions. So the region here and the mobile adaptation ratio compared to the other part of the world, it's very important. So that means that the expectation of the customers is very high from the institutions. So it's really crucial to achieving this digitization. Again, it's a very clear die or fly sort of stage for all the players. So that's why you should, just through the motivation coming from the customers, based on customer experience, you have to digitize your processes. Otherwise, we'll talk about the different market conditions.
Okay, Anthony?
So I think what's different and unique here is that a lot of this is driven by the public sector. So there's a top-down drive to adopt these new technologies as the basis of a country-wide transformation. So whereas in other countries you have the private sector that's experimenting and moving forward, and the government tends to be dragged, here it's the exact opposite, where the government sets this North Star, where we will become a blockchain-powered government and we'll be the happiest city on earth, etc., and that drives all the necessary transformation. So I think that's the fundamental kind of secret sauce to...
It's interesting you say that, because we talked about this in the first plenary this morning. Government getting involved, but then maybe having to step back and letting the private sector move on its own,
right?
As you were. I mean, is there a case for that?
Yeah. So a perfect example of that is the blockchain story in Dubai. So this story began 2 years ago, where the government sort of convened what they called the Global Blockchain Council, and they brought together public sector, private sector. They got everyone in the room, vendors, entities that in some cases were even competing with one another, and they started to run experiments to see, could blockchain be something that could deliver value for the entire nation. That then turned into a blockchain strategy, and then that blockchain strategy was turned into very concrete projects, and now it's moving forward into being scaled, right? But that's a very good example of that. But it started with the government.
All right. Look, we've got a few questions coming in. I want to get to a few of these. We've got 5 minutes. To Dilip, this question comes from the audience. Many people are using cryptos just to buy and sell and make quick gains out of it. Does it hurt the growth of cryptocurrencies, that usage for a quick buck?
So I mean, it's kind of chicken and egg. You have to create a marketplace. And right now, we have about 150, 200 exchanges around the world that trade in XRP. A lot of it, as you say, is very shallow trading by individuals. And that is not the use case that we are pursuing. What we are pursuing is the use of XRP as a financial asset by sophisticated institutions as a bridging mechanism. So does this hurt or harm? Well, it creates a lot of noise. And we certainly don't want that much noise, but we're waiting. And for example, this last quarter, the bulk of XRP sales were to institutional investors. And as this transitions away from retail to institutions who will start to use it for wholesale financial usage, that's when the turning point will come.
Got it. Another question for the audience, and this to you, Anthony. You talk about using the blockchain for the supply chain, but you need a cryptocurrency behind that or associated with that to make that work. Is that correct?
No, you don't.
You don't.
You don't. So it's important to distinguish between cryptocurrency, which is one very specific use of blockchain technology, and blockchain technology itself, which can be used to create new types of products and services that go far beyond cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is just the first example of blockchain. It's not the only example or necessarily the most valuable.
Another question, what is the best way for an individual or an organization, and let's talk about SMEs, to start engaging in the blockchain? Anyone?
And just let me add something. Blockchain just considered in a wrong way. I mean, when you just say about the blockchain, everybody talk about the cryptocurrencies. The blockchain is the platform where you can store your data, where you can transfer data from one point to another. Might be cash or anything, as in the Ripple case, but Ripple using a different sort of technology. So in this case, and I believe between the bank and the SMEs and the corporate customers, it's a way actually to use for to data transfer, because we have a lot of different documents and operational the approvals and the processes. Once you just digitize the process, relying on the blockchain, it's going to be easy for you because there are some different parties involved. So it's like a conditional sort of set of rules. Then you don't need to wait anybody. Once you see the one condition meets, and then easily the second step actually activated. So it's easy for you to proceed. Faster, easier, cheaper.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that specific question?
No, I think it's a stepping stone. So you have to have this new technology to connect each other, to share information, to make it more transparent, to settle ledgers across the world in real time. And once you've achieved that, then you say, how do I solve for liquidity? And that's when replacement of cash with crypto assets becomes more important.
Okay, back to you, Sehat. There's a question comes through. We've talked a lot about the usage in retail banking. What about corporate banking?
The corporate banking, actually looking at the size of the transactions, is crucial. Just one example from when I'm coming from, the bank that I worked earlier, we have the SWIFT fraud case. The bank lost $120 million US. So just because of the centralized base of the money transfer. So using the blockchain sort of technologies, especially for the commercial part, rather than the retail, actually is more crucial because looking at the size and the risk. So it's better for us to transfer money for speed, the contracts and the operational costs and the time is actually more important, and that's why as ADEP, so my colleague here also, we talk about different possibilities and opportunities.
Look, we're running out of time. Final question to all of you, and I want to get an opinion, a very quick reaction from all of you. Several times this morning I've mentioned the possible potential constraints in this region as a result of the DNA of the systems. I wonder, I'd like to get your opinion on this. Do you think perhaps I'm getting that completely wrong and this region is actually more suited to the blockchain and to cryptos than other regions in the West, for example? Dilip, why don't you start with that?
This is the only region in the world where I have not found any fans for SWIFT. So this is the incumbent, 40 years old, 11,000 banks. And there is a recognition here that we cannot be reliant on a centralized hub and spoke architecture.
Yeah.
So anything that is peer-to-peer that allows country A to deal with country B without country C having a view is, I think, strategically very important for this part of the world. Same thing in ASEAN, where there's 50% of trade happens within ASEAN. They don't need to use a global platform to do that if they can run it on a peer-to-peer basis. So I think strategically, what DLT offers this part of the world is very important.
Okay, Anthony, how do you feel from where you're sitting, and how soon will it be before we actually say, look, yeah, maybe we're more suited?
I don't think there's any meaningful constraints. I think we're definitely more suited, largely because of things, as I mentioned, the public sector-led drive, some of the national transformation projects that are underway. And the proof of that is that we're increasingly seeing other parts of the world come to this part of the world. So the so-called mature markets come to this part of the world to study the work that's being done here. So I think the pendulum is swung, which is evidence of the fact that the ecosystem and the constraints are not there.
Okay, and finally, Serhat, yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to steal from Anthony. The first thing, it takes 10 minutes for me to enter my home country, but it takes only 1 minute for me to enter the Emirates. So Emirates ID opens every door. But that's the risk here because it's a centralized data. Now the Dubai government actually is this initiative of using the blockchain for ID validation. So it will help as a bank, the KYC sort of issues. So I believe, just as the Anthony mentioned earlier, and having a sort of top-down initiative here is important. You don't need to spend time to convince anybody. Actually, government motivates us, push us to change our the methodologies, our mindset. So this is important.
Okay, look, I'm going to stop it there. It's time for lunch. So I want to thank my speakers. Serhat Yildirim, Chief Digital Officer, Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank. Sorry for renaming your bank earlier when I introduced you. Dilip Rao, Global Head of Infrastructure Innovation at Ripple, and Anthony Butler, CTO, IBM UAE. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for your questions. Let's go grab some lunch. Thanks very much. Thank you.